Hello, welcome to History Chats. Yeah, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Is that better? It's a little better. Yeah, we're continuing our look at some maps and the stories they can tell us with not one map, but a whole book of maps, the atlas. Yeah, I think everything looks like it's working all right. So I'm gonna kick it over and let Gary take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as Ben said, we're going to talk about the Atlas. This is Map Month, as you may very well know. So we're going to talk about the Atlas, which is basically a book of maps. So as always, we know that maps tell a story, and you know atlases, you know books of maps. A plat book has lots of maps, although it's not called an atlas. But highway atlases, a variety of other maps, atlases that we know of. Here at the Historical Society, we have a book of Sanborn maps. It's not an atlas as such, but it's a book of maps. So through the years, books of maps have been called and continue to be called an atlas. So we're going to look at that. So we're going to specifically be looking at Wisconsin maps, and we're going to narrow down into Marathon County and what the stories that, a map on a page is fine, and it may be colorful, it may be black and white, but it will tell a story. It will tell a story about Wisconsin. It will tell a story about Marathon County. So that's what we're going to do today. So in a few minutes during this history chats, I hope you get a chance to take a look at some atlases and some maps and some stories about Marathon County. We'll begin with this atlas, an historical atlas of Wisconsin's past and present, put together by the Wisconsin Cartographers Guild. It's a cool, one of my favorite little books because it has all kinds of little bit of stories in it. And we'll start with one of the pages in the book with a map of Wisconsin. And lo and behold, we have something about Wausau with regard to key cultural figures. Okay, so what we see is Frank Lloyd Wright. And in Wausau, Wisconsin, our architectural landmarks, so to speak, are two Frank Lloyd Wright houses here in Wausau, Wisconsin. Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, a famous international architect based in Taliesin down in southern Wisconsin, and also in Arizona, of course, but grew up in, he worked mostly in Chicago, and then he came into Wisconsin. But again, here in Wausau, Wisconsin, there are two houses. One, this house up on the Highland Park Boulevard area, the Manson House, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in his Usonian style of architecture. A cool house, certainly a landmark on the National Register of Historic Places in the Highland Park District. We can't say enough about Frank Lloyd Wright's influence here in Wausau, Wisconsin, including this house. And the other house, the Wright House on Grand Avenue, this is, it's a unique house unto itself. Now it is run by a commercial establishment. But again, so this is on Grand Avenue, again on the National Register of Historic Places, one of the architectural gems of this city and basically of this state. So again, a cultural Frank Lloyd Wright influence here in Wisconsin as well as in Wausau as a key cultural figure here in our history. Then there's another curious map, sort of emerging crops. So how crops developed in Wisconsin, and specifically in Marathon County. So here's a map of some of the products and through the years, their history here in Marathon County. You can see on the left the hay, and also as the crops develop, cheese, maple syrup. I didn't know that maple syrup really started in the 1860s here in Marathon County. I wasn't aware of that. Some of the figures on your right, including, of course, the fur of the fur farm, as well as other fox farms and mink farms in Marathon County. And then to your extreme right, of course, is the ginseng, which is also a significant crop here in our history. So again, so you get a little bit of a sense of what crops came into our existence and when, and they're a very big influence here in Marathon County. Another map in this atlas is this, what we call Ethnic Settlement Patterns 1940. And the green, as we center in on Marathon County, again, the green is, we know the Polish settlement in southeastern Marathon County coming northwest into Ponatuski, into that area, northwestern Marathon County. We know of that. But what's this little red dot east of Wausau? It says Dutch. Well, it must have had some significance in 1940 that they were putting it on the map. So what's the story here? Well, out on Highway N, east of Marathon County, there's a little Dutch settlement. Wilderness Church, built by devout Dutch settlers, came here in the early part of our history, out on, like I said, out on N, around the Eau Claire and Plover Rivers area. So here they came, and they eventually would start Forestville Church out on Highway N. And then again, we don't hear this story too much about the Dutch settlers here in Marathon County, and specifically being noted on that specific map. But here is the Mr. and Mrs. Reamer Hedinga, who resides on Highway N, and this article in 1930 tells their story of them coming from Holland into eastern Marathon County. It's an interesting story. And we, of course, know the stories of German Pomeranians coming into Marathon County. We know of the Polish settlers coming in from Portage County. You know, we know pretty much every ethnic group there is in Marathon County having their own story. But this map tells us that there was also a Dutch settlement on Highway N, and that settlement was quite significant as part of the settlement of eastern Marathon County. So again, we wouldn't really be aware of that story until we see perhaps a map like that in an atlas that will tell us, hey, you should take a look at this and see what kind of a story there is in eastern Marathon County, specifically centering on Forestville. Again, this is another map of Wisconsin. Of course, if you center in on Marathon County, we've told this story so many times, a variety of different ways. The railroad map, Wisconsin railroads as they came into Marathon County in the 1870s and in through the 1980s. And again, you know, narrowing in on Marathon County, we've seen this map before. We know the Chicago Northwestern coming in from Eland. We know the Milwaukee Road coming north through Wausau from Dancy. We know of the Wisconsin Central on the western side of Marathon County, the little Athens spur coming north through Athens from Abbotsford. So we know this history, but again, we through this cultural map, we understand that railroading played a large part of the cultural history of this county. we know the when the railroads came in, they were a key part in moving that great lumber, the lumber fields of northern Wisconsin. Made it a lot easier by the way of railroads. Instead of sending that white pine down the rivers, they can now use the railroads. It was quite important. And our railroads, of course, were very important in our history, a large story into itself. And of course, the railroads came into, into Wausau. Here's a great, I think this was a campaign special coming through Wausau, a great crowd. Again, the great significance that railroads came into Wausau, put really Wausau on the map, specifically this one specific day when a lot of people came to see this candidate. But of course, the biggest story with regard to railroads is the people that the railroads brought in, the immigrants, people from the east, from Canada. Here they came. They came into Marathon County, the great settlement beginning in the 1870s and 1880s. A great story, perhaps one of the largest stories that there is in the immigration story of Marathon County. So then there's another map, another story here to be told with regard to notable strikes and layouts. Well, we can go back. We can see that if we center in on Marathon County, there is some electrical, specifically the electrical workers, the paper makers, and I believe the teachers are also remarked. So in Wausau, so the big story in more recent history with regard to strikes is the Marathon Electric strike in the 1950s. A great labor dispute involving, like the article says, 600 workers at Marathon Electric. And then in the history of strikes and in the history of labor unions in Marathon County and Wausau, of course, we come to realize that this was perhaps one of the largest strikes there was. The teachers' strike later on, of course, was large, a variety of paper mill strikes also, but the Marathon Electric strike was quite significant in our history of Wausau and Marathon County. Again, a map indicating some of the key strikes that were happening here in Wausau and Marathon County. But of course, we can't talk about maps, and specifically ethnic maps. And I include this map as sort of an indicator of, we saw the Polish map a little bit ago. This is a map of the German settlement in Marathon County, pretty much north of Highway 29 into the towns of Berlin, Maine, a little bit into Texas, and of course Wausau. And also a smaller settlement along the western edge, mostly driven at that time by a railroad, the Wisconsin Central coming up. So again, influencing immigration patterns, but the large settlement of Germans in Marathon County. But if we're doing historical research, and if we are interested in what Europe looked like. So what did Europe look like before, when our ancestors started to come to America? And you can go back as, early on, very, very early, they started to come into Marathon County, of course. But we take a look and we can see that from an historical atlas, a lot of maps, a lot of history maps, looking at what Europe was like or whatever. So Europe through the years, especially in the 1800s, and that's the largest immigration movement, was in the 1800s. But again, the maps of Europe changed. And if you can identify specifically what year your ancestors may have came to America. The map of Europe that they came from would look significantly different than what it does today. So here we have a map early on in the 1800s, and if you really want to narrow into what, for instance, Germany looked like, if your ancestors are coming from Germany and you specifically know where and what city, what community, you can do the research to find out where you can have a sense of where they were coming from, what the lay of the land looked like, what the maps looked like, what was really happening in Europe. For instance, the Pomeranians here along the Baltic Sea coming into Marathon County, and also the little blue, if you can see Westphalia. Well, we had a little group from Westphalia coming into Wausau and settling here. So you get a sense of there's where Westphalia was. There was Pomerania. Where would they be sailing from? All kinds of different things that you can see on a map of Europe or specifically of a European country through an historical atlas. I conclude with just a couple stories. An atlas of ethnic diversity in Wisconsin. So for instance, we don't really see too much of the population of Swiss ancestry. Like I said before, we know German and we know Polish ancestry. But if we narrow in on Marathon County and take a look at what the central part of Wisconsin looked like, we do see that there was a significant, it becomes a little darker purple, and you can see that there did become a significant part of Swiss settlement here in Marathon County. It may not have been dramatic as the Germans and Polish, but there was significant Swiss movement into Marathon County. And another map as part of this is the predominant ethnic groups. And again, this sort of reinforces my thinking with regard to the Polish settlement, because if we narrow in on Marathon County, we can see that a great significance with regard to the Polish settlement and coming up from boiling over from Portage County, the early settlements of Polish people into Portage County. Eventually, as the land was sold and started to fill up, the Polish settlers moved up into southeastern Marathon County, mostly centering around the little community of Bavent. But a great, another evidence that the Polish settlement in Marathon County was predominant and of great significance in our history. Again, reinforcing that little shape, that little yellow corner of Marathon County as being significantly a Polish settlement. So with that, this is just a brief run through. I just really wanted to have my go at an atlas because I think that they are quite significant with regard to telling the story of Marathon County. A lot of atlases, a lot of books of maps, but they tell in their own unique way, whether it be ethnic, railroads, or whatever. They tell their own story about how we came to be, and a great deal of our history is revealed in maps specifically and included in atlases. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
Yeah, so we had a question, which is maybe a good one. Why is it called an atlas? I don't know if that's something that you...
I did not pursue. I think that's really an older, the little bit of research, it's really an older word, I think, coming from the Latin, as I recall.
Yeah, and I was just curious, 'cause I did a little digging while you were doing the program. It is actually, so there's is it Dutch, Flemish cartographer called Gerardus Mercator, which is like he's one of like the big names in cartography, and he thought the ancient Greek Titan named Atlas was like the first cartographer, and so he decided to use the name. Apparently, that's why it is referred to that. Just
If Mercator says that, then so
yeah,
be it.
but yeah, interesting etymology there. We don't necessarily delve into that. But yeah, I think that's it. It doesn't look like there's any other questions, but thank you for that one. It's a good one. Um, Next week, we're going to continue our March MAPness theme to look at a specifically, let's see, this is a very zoomed in look at the map that we're going to talk about next week, which is a railroad map, specifically having to do with land that was for sale in the 1880s. So I won't spoil too much more than that. Partially because I'm not entirely sure what we're going to all talk about, but we're going to use this map to see what the county looked like back in the 1880s and kind of explain this story about how you go about buying land and how this all fits in. It's a really interesting map, so excited to look at that one. Yeah, and if you're watching this the day we're doing it live, or the next day here, oh, that's last month's. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Let's do. We can kind of see it here. Yeah, we have our Next History Speaks is coming up this weekend on Saturday, which is going to be presented by James Taylor of the Neenah Historical Society, but also a former editor-in-chief of the Adams Papers of the Massachusetts Historical Society, and he's going to be talking about his expertise on the John and Abigail Adams family through the papers and all of that. Going to be a very interesting program. If you're interested and you're available, you want something to do on this Saturday afternoon, come on by the Historical Society for the free event and learn a little bit about founding family of the United States. But yeah, with that, I think we'll call it a day. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time for some